Hello, my name is Lillian Gergich, and my presentation today is going to be on social learning and memory. Some key topics and terms that I wanted to focus on for this presentation were social learning, which is learning through others, through observation, communication, modeling and copying, which is seeing what other people are doing and you tend to do the same thing. Um, Social learning theory is the kinds of reinforcements that a particular individual has experienced in the past, and this information that they previously got from other social situations is a way to kind of understand how they're going to act in social situations in the future. True imitation, that's copying with like motor activity, so that's less talking or doing something without like moving parts of your body. Emulation is copying with no motor activity. Mirror neurons, they fire the same way when someone performs an action as they do while they're watching said action. So when they're watching somebody else do something, those neurons are firing, and when they're doing that act themselves, those neurons are also firing. Taking a closer look at social learning theory, we can see the reinforcement theory is included in this, and that is when people copy actions that they have seen in their lives that have produced a positive outcome, whether it be something that they saw their friend go through, something that they saw on television, or any evidence that they can kind of get to like get a knowledgeable way to react. And then reinforcement sensitivity theory is a personality theory. It describes humans as biological organisms that are sensitive to rewards and punishments. And that was a quote that I found from a source that I wanted to bring. If we look closer at imitation, emulation, and contagion, an example of imitation and modeling in children would be the Bobo doll experiment done by Bandura. In this experiment, the adult would go in and they would like beat up the Bobo doll and like be very violent, aggressive towards it, kind of knock it over. The Bobo experiment, it did not use reinforcements, it did not use punishments, so all these things that the children were modeling, which happened to be the same thing that the adults were doing to the doll, which it demonstrates modeling and how they kind of act as they see. But we knew this in early childhood. We know that children look to us adults to figure out how they should act, what they should do, and we are a model for them. So when an example of emulation, when emulation becomes reciprocity. So this was an experiment to find observation, action predictions, complementary actions. There were some pre and post sessions. And what they would do was they would take a video of somebody making a coffee, like the way that their hands were positioned, how they grabbed the creamer, how they grabbed all the ingredients, how they put it all together. And this was an experiment that the researchers looked very closely, frame by frame, at all of the pictures that they took. They took a video of the different sessions, and they found that there were many similarities after watching the one video, that people just kind of picked up what they should, like how to make the coffee, and they kind of took from other people. Emotional contagion is kind of like if you're out and you see somebody smiling, you're gonna smile. If someone's laughing, they make you laugh. It's kind of just our automatic response to when other people are experiencing emotions. We kind of feel excuse me, those emotions too. And this can be to visual, auditory occurrences, but either way, it's an easier way for them to kind of make that connection. So if we look at observational conditioning, copying actions of others without imitating, which is similar to emotional contagion, the learner's attention is brought to the stimuli. As we can compare this to imitative learning because we're observing what is going on around us, and we may act the same as somebody else does when seeing how their action, what it led to, what the outcome was. This form of social learning, it plays a dominant role during early language learning in children as well, and it shows more useful information than the other features present. So it's going to focus on what exactly we can take from each situation and how we can use that for ourselves. And we can look at this as something that kind of just happens as well. It's not something that we're going out of our way to copy somebody else. It's similar to emotional contagion, where it's kind of like a primal instinct within us to react that way. If we look at the social transmission of information, there was an observer rat experiment that was included in the textbook where we had a demonstrator rat and observer rat. They had one batch of food in the middle, and they both had the food, and then they separated them. And the one rat was given a different type of food, and the other rat was given a type that was also different to what the other rat had. And once they brought the rats together, the one rat had smelled the food on the other one's breath, and he was like, that he didn't choose to eat, or he didn't eat what I ate, so maybe what he's eating is better. And they found that when they put the rats back into their enclosures, the one rat did end up going to the food that smelled most like what he smelled off of the demonstrator's rat's breath. So that's kind of a good example of social transmission of information, because the one rat found to what he thought was really good food, and the other rat took that information and was like, okay, this is good food, so I'm going to take that information and I'm going to use that to decide how I act and what food I choose to eat. I'd say an easier way to understand this slide would to kind of be thinking that like this social transmission is basically the process which an individual has information that can be useful to the rest of the group, be that humans, any other animals, and they're passing this information that may affect the way that the group members hold themselves, carry themselves, and what they do. Social manipulation of behavior. We can see this in news. We can see this in video games. It's pretty much anything that we can see that might influence us to act a certain way. So I found some information online about a study that was done on children with violent video games, and it was very easy to see that the children that were exposed to these violent video games had more tendencies to act out violently in their lives. And this shows that there are connections between what we see every day and what we do with that information. We can choose to take it and utilize it to our benefit, or it can be to our detriment sometimes. Sometimes it takes doing the action to realize. But if it really comes down to it, we look at neural mechanisms. They underlie true imitation. So this is basically the center of where this starts. If we look at mirror neurons, which are the term I was talking about in the beginning of the presentation, they fire when we're watching somebody do an action, when we're doing the action. They looked at monkey and human brains, and regions in the cortex that become more active they found to be different. But primarily, species that mirror neurons related to species that have mirror neurons, they related to observation of action. We saw this in songbirds as they listened to the other birds around them, and they use their neural circuits to kind of produce the songs, the sounds that they need to get in sync with the rest of them. And then I had a quote down here: sensory representations and translated into the motor acts necessary to replicate the actions. And that was found in the textbook. And then if we take a closer look at social conformity, so self-reported measures showed a number of social effects that occurred only in the eye contact condition, indicating that the agent's gaze behavior has an impact on participants' experience. This was from some information I found online where they did a study to see if people looking at others that were acting a certain way, to see if giving them eye contact and kind of like watching them would have an effect on how they acted and what they chose to do. And they did find that the gaze behavior that they were talking about in the quote actually did have quite an effect on how the participants handled themselves. It was almost as if they were more self-conscious. So it's easy to say that even with all these mirror neurons and all this imitation, like our need to feel like we fit in and belong also has a effect on this as well. It's not just about what's going on in our brains, it's about how we perceive everything around us. Social conformity is the reason for traditions being continued and ongoing evolution of different cultures around the world. As generations go, think about it, you were passed down maybe recipes from your grandmother, maybe the way you dress is closely associated to your culture and how they've been dressing for years and decades, maybe even. It's just really important to look at how groups come together and like how it evolves over time. There will be changes made that maybe new generations find new information that they want to pass along to incoming generations, and this is how you get that change, and it's not just the same for decades and decades. But in some instances it is, but in a lot of them it is not, and it has changed over time. If we look at clinical perspectives, imitative deficits, neurons, sometimes things happen, there's damage done to the brain when neurons die, and there's frontal lobe damage present. Echolalia is something that will commonly be present, and that is repeating words and sounds that one may hear around them. Say you're in a room and you hear somebody say a phrase, and instantly, without even thinking about it, you're echoing that. Like, that's something that can happen. And an example of that, autism spectrum disorder, it's a developmental disorder, and it is involved with the deficits associated with social learning and interaction. So it can make them not be able to kind of read the room as well. Maybe they won't have the same observational information in their head that they can use to make them act a certain way, and this can cause them to come off to other people as inappropriate or anything like just not what they should be acting like, which there's not really anything wrong with this. It's just there's damage in the frontal lobe, so the neurons are dying. They're not able to fire like they would if this disorder was not present. And then looking deeper, I found some more things in the textbook that I thought would go pretty well along with this topic. Patients with frontal lobe lesions tend to copy observed actions automatically, but they also have difficulty copying actions when instructed to do so. So this is like maybe they were out with a group of people and echolalia, maybe they said a phrase that their friend just said, but then when somebody asked them, like, can you do this like this person, then they have a hard time. So it's really difficult to kind of pinpoint exactly what things will be affected with copying actions and what they can and cannot do, because I've seen a lot of instances with people with autism spectrum disorder, and I've seen a variety of different ways they handle social interactions, what they can and can't model. Individuals with autism spectrum disorder tend to automatically copy others and to have problems copying meaningless actions. So these things are just happening. They're not making it happen. It's just something inside their mind that isn't working the same way that it works for a lot of us. But once again, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just everybody's different. And then to conclude, some ideas to think about. I saw this in the textbook and I thought it was actually quite interesting. Could social learning just be a combination of classical and operant conditioning? Because if we look at everything we know about classical and operant conditioning, it kind of makes sense as to why having all those principles together, it could produce social learning. We're being conditioned every day. We don't even realize it half the time. And if we truly look at every aspect of both of these conditioning methods, we can see a lot of similarities and how they could be tied into how we learn socially and what we take from the world around us. And then I just wanted to end with one final quote. Albert Bandura has suggested that social learning is a process that permits rapid, errorless acquisition of cognitive and perceptual motor skills, and that humans who take full advantage of this process have learned to learn. And I just thought that was very fitting for this last slide. But then we have our works cited. And yeah, that was my presentation on social learning. And I think it's easy to say if we look, those who pay attention to their surroundings, they're going to learn more and gain more skills than someone who's not paying attention frequently to what is going on around them. So overall, it's very easy to say that social learning in total is taking information from the world around us, figuring out how we have to act in certain social situations, and building upon this knowledge as the decades go on and passing that knowledge down to our children and grandchildren.